This is Saving the Game, a Christian podcast about tabletop role-playing and collaborative storytelling. Recorded Thursday, February 22nd of 2018, it's episode 127. In this episode, Christian Allegory and Allusion, plus our thoughts on Benny's, Jenny's thoughts on Toad Patrol, Grant's daughter's first forays into game design and GMing, and more. Welcome to Saving the Game. I'm Grant.
I'm Peter.
And I'm Jenny.
And this is take 2. Nobody asked what happened to the first take.
That's probably for the best.
It really is. I am completely out of it.
You can use your imagination to imagine what sort of absurdity happened, and you probably won't be wrong. But
write in and tell us what you think happened.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Listener engagement. Make up disaster scenarios. You'll be right.
Even if you weren't originally, you will be retroactively.
Yes, and.
Yeah, very much so. We've decided to take our own advice and, reprogram whatever tragedies that you inflict on us into our past or something. I don't know. You can't really retcon reality like that. We're going to have a take 3 if I keep going. How have you all been?
I've been all right.
That's good. I am actually super out of it and will be incoherent for most of this episode, for which I apologize.
Yeah, Grant actually has in the outline at one point.
2 points. It's pretty much my sole contribution to this outline. I'm doing
That's
great.
Okay. You know what? You've basically written entire episodes on your own in the past, so if you got to take a mulligan every once in a while, we're going to let you. Just so you know, that's on the record now. So, I'm also not quite doing the greatest. I'm getting over the remnants of a flu I had last week that started with a day where I was at 103-degree fever and then spent another day with my internal thermostat completely out of whack and seesawing between about 97.5 and 100.8 or so all day long in like 45-minute intervals. It was great. So, yeah, I'm feeling human again for the first time in a while.
Good.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. Yeah. We might actually get some D&D in this weekend.
Yeah, I know. I felt so bad missing due to health reasons last time, but I was just so wiped out. It was just, I couldn't.
Actually, I say that, but I've got a kid's birthday coming up. I don't know. Maybe we might just be frantically cleaning the house and taking down Christmas. Don't tell anyone.
You know what? We, you just did. You just told everyone.
You just did.
Look, secrets and podcasting are kind of mutually exclusive topics, Grant.
No. This is between you, me, the microphone, the camera crew, and, I don't know, the NSA?
Yeah. and several hundred regular listeners of ours, but sure.
Yeah. Longtime listeners will know this Christmas business, not a new thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've still got some Christmas decorations up, but yeah.
You guys had the most adorable, off-kilter Christmas tree, too. I saw pictures.
And then it formally started losing needles, and we had to chuck it out. But we do actually have a really good Christmas tree pickup system here, so it was good.
Sadly, I am the Christmas tree pickup system around here.
Oh.
Grant picks up the Christmas tree, puts it back in the box, and then sticks the box in storage, right? Is that pretty much how that goes?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why it hasn't happened yet, because I'm a terrible human.
Well, you've been a little busy. I mean, we gave you a lot of editing the last few episodes.
This is true. Anyway, my Christmas shame aside, we have a little bit of news and notes and some gaming to recap. And then we have a topic that is going to be kind of weird because it's one that we could go super in-depth on, but I don't think any of us feel super qualified to talk about. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah. One other thing, though, on the topic. We reached out to our listeners on a couple of different occasions because we really did want to do this one. I believe this is actually a topic that we have literally, no joke, no exaggeration, not the slightest bit of hyperbole here, has literally been on our topic list since Grant and I sat down to come up with the idea for the podcast over 5 years ago.
This is true.
This is part of our original 1.0 topic list, and we are finally getting to it.
We are talking about gaming in allegorical Christian settings in this episode. Settings like Narnia, Paralandra, settings
Lord
that
of
we
the
can
Rings
draw
to a
from,
certain extent.
And, of course, a setting that Peter has been sort of working on that is at least Christian around the edges in some ways.
Yeah.
But we do have a couple other things to talk about before then. First of all, Jenny, you were on another podcast.
I was. I finally got around to doing a podcast with the Gameable Disney folks, and I talked about a show from my youthiest youth called Toad Patrol, which is basically like if you took Redwall and made it about toads, but then made it a little simpler. I've talked about it on the show before, but I finally got to talk about it in great depth with Chris from Gameable Saturday Morning. We will be linking that show in the show notes. I did not go nearly as long on Toad Patrol as either Grant or Peter did on their respective times on Gameable Saturday Morning. But that's partly because Toad Patrol, there really isn't that much to it. It even has missing episodes. So like...
Yes. That was actually one of my favorite things about this whole thing you do. It's like, I can only find this episode in Serbian.
Yeah.
Why Serbian?
I don't know. I wish I knew, but I don't. So if any of our listeners know how to write and translate Serbian to English, please contact me, please. Oh my goodness, there are 3 missing Toad Patrol episodes. I really want to get them translated. I will pay money. Please.
Help Jenny get this little bit of her childhood back.
Yes, please.
Do a good deed. So, 2 things about that. First of all, I have listened to the episode, and it was great.
Absolutely. Second
of all, congratulations on becoming a full Saving the Game host now that you have talked with Gameable.
Yeah!
Yep.
Only took, 10 months or so?
It took us longer, so you're actually ahead of the curve. Well done.
Yeah, it took us considerably longer, actually, so...
Mm-hmm.
But seriously, they're great. They're some of our best podcasting friends, and I'm actually very glad that you got a chance to talk to Chris, because he's such a fun guy to talk to, and just such a nice dude.
Yep. Also, really good episode. I had a ton of fun with it.
Yeah, definitely.
Quick gaming recap. Quick maybe for you other two. I've got a surprisingly large thing to talk about.
Well, our D&D game hasn't happened since the last time we recorded, so there's that.
There's that. Peter's been blogging up a storm, which has been great.
Mm-hmm. An excellent storm. A very good storm.
Storm with a little extra lightning, but yeah.
Yeah, normally we're in the habit of putting out a blog post every other Tuesday in between episodes. Peter's been just throwing them out there. So if you're not paying attention to that blog, Peter writes some really good stuff. And of course, if you follow us on social media, we try and share those out every time those are posted. Or if you want to join our Discord channel, we try and post about them in there so that people can talk about them. That's always fun, too.
And there's usually some good discussion around episodes, blog posts, and just kind of in general. We have a nice, smart, civilized group of listeners, which we've always been happy for, but for some reason, Discord really just seems to resonate well with a lot of people, and we've got some good regulars that come in and talk with us on a fairly regular basis. And hey, that's not behind any kind of a wall at all. Yeah. We talk about, getting access to Patreon questions like we're going to be doing, soon, or being able to vote on the quarterly topic through Patreon and stuff. The Discord is not locked away behind anything. The only thing that's necessary for you to participate in that is to, A, agree to be part of the civility that continues to go on in air, and B, show up. That's it.
Yeah.
Our listeners are wonderful, mature adults. It's such a great thing.
Yeah. So if you're not part of that, join. There's a link on our website, stgcast.org.
It's right over on the right side,
Jenny, how about you? Any gaming?
Not role-play gaming, because my mother was gone for the last 2 weeks to visit family and stuff. But I did get to play a board game that I am now a very big fan of. It is now in my top 5 board games that I am looking forward to playing again. It's called the Grimm Forest. And it is an absolute blast. The mechanics are simple, but heavily interconnected with one another. And so there's just a lot of really cool interplay between all the different cards and actions you can take. It's a riot. It's such a huge amount of fun. And I'm not just saying that because I won my first round.
Cool.
But it's a really great game. And I would recommend it for pretty much all ages. It's a very good time. I highly recommend the Grimm Forest.
I gotta say, you really had my attention at simple but deeply interlocked. Some of my favorite games of all time, including 5e D&D, actually fall into that set of descriptors. So that's always a good sign when you see that kind of tight design.
It's basically a resource collecting and management game, but the you've got 3 resources to deal with. I've seen games that have like 12 resources to deal with. You have like 3 things to think about at any given time. And that's not really that heavy a load, but then you've got these interference cards where you can mess with each other and you can mess with the ability to mess with each other, and it's just so much fun. It's an absolute blast. I will be bringing it with me to Fear the Con. So, Peter, if you're going to be able to get to Fear the Con...
Oh, I don't miss Fear the Con unless something tragic happens.
Yeah.
So I will play that with you when we're down there.
Oh, yes. I am greatly looking forward to playing it with you. Grant, if I could afford it, I would totally send you a copy because you and your kids would have so much fun.
I am not lacking for games right now because my daughter has decided to be a game designer.
Oh, you've got to talk about this.
Oh, yes, please do talk about this.
Okay. Anything else on yours? Because I don't want to cut you off.
No. Please. That was an excellent transition.
Well, let's clear the air for this.
All right. So I got to talk about this. First off, I was not feeling well and skipped out on my fellowship game yesterday. And then, of course, we haven't done any D&D for various different reasons, as we talked about before. So you would think, oh, I'm short on gaming. No, my daughter's decided to use all the construction paper in the world and start making her own games. So I picked up No Thank You Evil a while back. We've managed to play like 2 sessions of it, maybe 3. My daughter is obsessed. She keeps asking for it. Unfortunately, I'm a little too busy to sit down, and I don't do well planning out game sessions that need to be that tightly controlled and laid out. So I've really been struggling with it. So we're playing a game. I think I sat down with her and like played like Crazy 8s or something a couple weekends ago, teaching her some very basic ideas of like card games. She comes in with this pile of scraps of construction paper. What is this? Do you want to play a game I made? Sure, sweetie. Okay. Well, it was a matching game where the idea was to match arrows that were pointing in different directions. Now, she'd made like 7 cards for this. They were all different sizes. And she hadn't thought, because she's 5, to make some way of creating a standard orientation for these cards, which is a problem when you're matching arrows pointing in different directions.
Yeah.
And there were like 7. So it didn't exactly work well. But she was super into it. And so I was like, okay, well, listen, let me cut you out some more even pieces of paper, like 2 pieces of construction paper, fold it a few times, cut each one into 16 pieces, right? Super easy.
Right.
She took that and made her own fairly useful card game where, again, she's 5. It's this game that she made to help people learn to speak unicorn. So my wife and I are both learning Japanese, and so she kind of hears us practicing a lot. Japanese, has its own syllabary, so we're looking at characters. We've got lists of characters up on the wall, that sort of thing. So she's kind of used to seeing that. And this is something she's doing at school as well, like recess, free time kind of stuff. This is something she's doing with a friend. So she sat down and wrote out a 1-to-1 character guide in Unicorn. And she made a matching game out of these cards. And then she put the English letter of these symbols that she'd created up in the top left to orient the card and to teach people. And it basically turned into a matching game, right? Like kind of like memory.
All right.
Okay.
She did 50 cards by herself.
Oh, my goodness.
Which for a 5-year-old is pretty significant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
5-year-olds tend to give up on that quicker than you would think. First rule set needed help. So I kind of talked with her about those. And this is where I contributed a little more than she did. But what we ended up doing was a matching game, basically like memory. It's not fancy, but for something that we kind of just spent a morning coming up with on the fly, it worked out fairly well.
Yeah.
So then later she asked me to run No Thank You Evil. And as I said before, I struggle with that. I made some sort of excuse, and about an hour later, she brought me her version of No Thank You Evil, which she had made so she could run it for me.
So your kid is GMing at the tender age of 5.
She was trying. She was certainly trying. She had made little character sheets, which were, again, little scraps of paper that she'd drawn stick figures on and, like, put lines in for the other parts of the character sheet, because there are supposed to be lines of text. So she just put those in, right?
Okay.
But the way No Thank You Evil works, there are little tokens that you kind of spend to add bonuses, like, smarts, strength, and things like that. She made one of each of those tokens that we had been drawn on, and she labeled the characters with names and drew little stick figure art for them, things like that. And I can't be like, well, no, I'm not going to do this now that you've put all this work into it. So obviously I had to play. we ended up having a great time, which was good because I was not feeling great. I was pretty grumpy. She completely changed things. It was fantastic. It was kind of a little Einstein's style quest. Something has happened. We got to go get the pieces and put this machine back together. Queen Bee's worker drone making machine. The buttons all fell off the machine and flew off to different countries. Again, this is very Little Einsteins for anybody who has watched Little Einsteins.
Okay.
You'll recognize this sort of format. And it worked surprisingly well. I was playing a character named Icebox. Don't ask. It's an inside joke. And I had a pet kangaroo, a flying kangaroo named Foo. F-U-H. The H is silent. Yeah. She had a little trouble remembering that she did not have a player character and that she was not the player. She sometimes was like, oh, yeah, and then we do this. I'm like, who's we? Oh, right. You. Yeah. You know. And she had some trouble not taking over the story, but she did a pretty good job. She learned a lot about yes and. We had a conversation about that. I think the highlight was the pirate ship, which was full of mean pirates who, and I'm quoting here, capture people and put them in cages for a human people zoo. She comes by this sort of darkness, honestly.
It's kind of dark. Yeah.
It was helmed by Captain Blackbeard, whose beard was so long it could wrap all the way around the ship, and so was normally piled up on deck. And this was interesting. When it was time for her to talk as Blackbeard, she got scared because Blackbeard was scary, and the idea of being Blackbeard scared her. But after a couple of minutes, she figured out that she could, and again, I'm quoting here, just tell me what he says and does without being him. It's an interesting little breakthrough that she had.
Narrative detachment.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then she let me feed him to a whale after I dipped his beard in honey, so that was fun. Funny addendum to this, she made my wife do this, and apparently dip Blackbeard's beard in honey so a whale can eat him is the only solution to the pirate ship. Nothing else. Nothing Chrissy would do.
Your daughter's a railroader. You got to nip that in the bud, man.
Oh, yeah. No, we had to talk about that. I was like, what have you done, Grant? Chrissy's texting me this. It's like, this is the only solution. I gave her a completely different workable solution. Like, I tie up all the pirates with Blackbeard's beard, and her response was, they escape, and then a whale eats him by the beard.
Okay.
Or no, it was, she escapes, and then somebody flies up and says, here's 100 jars of Queen Bee's honey. You should put this on his beard. So, railroading is the next thing to learn. But we're getting there.
Yeah.
Okay?
Don't introduce her to Navi anytime soon.
Starting to GM at 5 is just so far ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I didn't start GMing until the tender age of like 20. So like,
again, this is a very linear kind of game, but it is that idea of storytelling, right? Back and forth.
I still feel like you're downplaying the fact that you have a 5-year-old that's just like, you know what? I'm a GM. I'm going to just dive in here. I probably am
because I'm trying to be modest. You know, I don't want to bask in the reflected light of my daughter's brilliance. That's a recipe for terrible parenting if ever there was one.
I mean, but this is a gaming podcast. That's pretty advanced gaming for that.
Don't get me wrong. I am super proud of her. Okay. She did a great job. Again, there was no system for this. This was pure improv. We had little props, but none of these system bits mattered at all. This was pure improv roleplay, but that back and forth pretend and that back and forth storytelling is still really fun. And that's a good way to kind of get the idea of role-playing and adventuring across.
Well, and also speaking as an adult that's had to kind of work to get some of that back, if she can make sure she never loses that in the first place, she'll be in great shape for future gaming she does.
Yeah, well, that is true. Also, she spent the past weekend reading through the monster manual.
Oh, dear.
Well, I had them out because I was trying to do D&D prep, and she grabbed it.
No, I just mean next week you're going to have to deal with a rust monster. Because she's in that early GMing phase, you know? So, yeah,
well, there's that.
Any metal objects you have, just kiss those goodbye.
Well, actually, you say that, but also that was interesting because she's always been a little sensitive.
Okay.
And she did a really good job of like looking through and talking about the scary monsters because the monster manual naturally leans towards things that are scary and bad so that heroic player characters can defeat them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, there's some good aligned stuff. There's plenty of neutral aligned stuff. There's plenty of just people, but it is a monster manual for a reason.
Right.
Those monsters serve a narrative purpose. She did a good job, much better than the last time she borrowed my monster manual, looking through and being like, oh, I'm not scared of this. Oh, this is interesting. Okay. Yeah, if she's still just looking at pictures, she didn't want to read much on them. Mm-hmm. She did a really good job of like not getting scared this time around. So it's not gaming related other than the fact that it was a monster manual, but it's just kind of a cool parenting thing to be like, oh, hey, she's growing. That's awesome.
Yeah. Keep building that line between fantasy and reality so you can enjoy both more.
Yeah, actually, this is gaming related. The one thing that did scare her was the Lich.
Yeah. If you're going to be scared of something in the monster manual.
Right. And the art is scary, right? It's kind of a scary looking Lich dude. Mm-hmm. Apparently he's got kind of this creepy, costumey, capey robe.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I just grabbed my copy and looked at it. Yeah, that is, I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, that Lich is a solid 8.5 on the scary scale.
It's supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool because we had a conversation about boss monsters as opposed to like regular monsters. So that was kind of cool. And then we had a conversation about gotcha monsters like the Mimic.
Mm-hmm.
And how you shouldn't overuse them.
Well, she was like, well, is it a treasure chest monster? I was like, well, not exactly. It's designed to pretend to be something good and then actually be a monster. And she's like, oh, yeah, it's not very fun, is it? I don't know. Maybe. I was like, well, no, because it's a bait and switch. I didn't use bait and switch, but kind of just explain the idea of like, here's something cool. Oh, no, I took it away and put a monster there instead. Ha ha. It's like, oh, I wish that wasn't in here. Well, hold on. There's some cool ways to do it. So this is something I really have decided that I would like to do maybe as a no thank you evil kind of adventure. We started talking about a shape-shifting monster in a house.
Okay.
Like pretending to be an extra chair or a rug or a painting. So I'm thinking I may do a no thank you evil scenario based on having to find like a wizard's runaway shape-shifting pet.
Oh, that would be great.
That'd be really good.
It's hiding in a big house somewhere. And so you kind of have to do like looking around for things that are out of place.
You're like, why is that lamp snickering? Where did it go? Oh, right. Man.
And
I almost had it.
She's got this weird one-off kids book. It's kind of a cartoon. Cindy Lou and the Witch. Don't ask me. I have no idea what this is from.
What?
Yeah, it's bizarre, but it's this kid who suddenly there's a witch and her pet. And the witch is like, hey, would you watch my pet for me? I'm like, this seems weird, but all right. And this witch's pet is this very cartoony witch, broomstick and all. But the pet is this dog who has drunk so many potions that every time it sneezes, it changes into a different animal.
Oh, dear.
And of course, there's a series of wacky hijinks like, oh, it changed into a cat and ran into a cat show and then changed back into a dog after it sneezed again and chased all the cats out and then became a giraffe. Bizarre stuff, right?
Right.
But that same idea of like a pet is stuck in this loop of constantly changing seems like a great kid story hook that I can latch onto.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's definitely some narrative meat on that bone.
I apologize for this going so long, but this is the only gaming I've had in 2 weeks.
Well, and it's cool and it's different and, it's something that you're proud of your daughter for doing, so I think this deserves some time.
Yeah, it is interesting watching her kind of explore what stories mean in a way, because she's starting to grow out of that early phase where stories are completely real.
Right.
Mm.
And she's doing a lot better about handling things that are scary. So it's kind of an interesting thing to grow through. And once she kind of really can separate scary thing from personal danger, yeah, I kind of want to start gaming with her a little more seriously. Like, I'm not going to run an Unknown Armies game for her or something like that. But
yeah, that would be bad at this age. But
but maybe there is a scary dragon who really just needs a cough drop or something. There's ways to be like, oh, it's scary, but not really. But previously, when she was even a little bit younger, she would shut down at, oh, it's a scary dragon.
Yeah.
Well, now we can get past that and tell a story about, hey, maybe that dragon wasn't really so scary after all. And that's a fun place to be.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's kind of cool, at least from my perspective, is I didn't actually start gaming as a hobby until I was probably, 18, 19 years old or something like that. Maybe a little younger than that, 16, 17. I was still in high school. But aside from family board games and some primitive computer games and stuff, my initial form of geekery was like, Legos and comic books, because that's what there was. Mm-hmm. And, my family wasn't like Jenny's, where they were gamers and exposed me to it from an early age. So it's really fascinating to hear how this young mind your daughter has parses and interacts with and synthesizes all of these gaming concepts that I didn't even encounter until I was 10 years older than her or more. It's cool. It's kind of a neat thing to hear about. It's very much outside my own experience.
Yeah, it's outside my experience as well. I didn't start till I was 20. I did like a tiny bit of D&D my freshman year, but really the first functional game I ever played, and I use that term very advisedly because none of those initial D&D games lasted more than half a session, was like a Shadowrun campaign my junior year of college, or what would have been my junior year if I had been at all a functional adult at that time. That was a very different experience. I grew up reading Lord of the Rings. I remember I once missed recess simply because I was so engrossed in reading Lord of the Rings in the back of the room that I didn't notice the class get up and leave.
That's when you know you've got a good book.
Yeah, I was that nerd, but that was my kind of geekery. Legos, like you said, books, and like watching Next Gen with my parents.
Yeah.
So this is very different and very interesting.
All right. Do we have anything else from our intro segment, or?
Goodness knows I have monopolized this conversation enough. Let's move on.
All right. Let's hit our Patreon question, and then we can move on to our scripture and our actual topic, which we're going to have a shockingly low amount of time for, but that's okay.
That's all right. So I can surely cut out some of my rambling. All right, let's do this.
All right.
This one is from a guy who I think prefers to go by Mr. X. That's the pseudonym that he uses on Patreon, which is fine.
All right.
What do you think about bennies? A great way to help balance those days with bad luck, a new outlet for power gamers to screw with the game, another mechanic to clutter games with mechanic creep. Consider games which roll single die versus games with a pool of many dice. Yeah, so this is an interesting question. I will say up front,
I liked them during Savage Worlds when we were doing that Shadowrun game. I thought they were great for that.
Yeah, I agree. I do like bennies. Much like any statistical resource, it is possible for people to misuse them, to award them too much, to be too stingy with them, to depend on them too much because of other game imbalances. But in a functioning game, I think they're a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. I think they're a good tool to have in the toolbox. I know that the first game and only game I ever ran, I wanted initially to sort of force bennies into the game because it was a con game. And so you'd get a benny every time you made a pun that made me laugh.
There you go.
Because I was running a system called Everything is Dolphins, and it just lent itself so much to punnery, and I loved just how ridiculous the setting was. I didn't want a serious game, and I wanted everybody to know it wasn't a serious game, so I wanted to add in bennies for puns. I ended up not doing that, but I thought about doing it.
Well, yeah, and okay, first of all, I do think there was a period of time in game design where bennies were the new hotness, and every game had bennies.
Yeah, exploding dice were like that for a while, too.
Yeah, I think we've gotten away from that, and now people realize that bennies are a tool in the toolbox, but they are not the epitome of game design. Yep. So that is good. They do help balance things pretty well, and I do like, especially for con games, having something that where you can just say, I'm going to spend one of my points and continue to have fun.
Yeah.
I think they're especially good for narrative control purposes.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time, one of the best ways you can use them is to allow the players to have some kind of a rationed way where they can be like, hey, I got an idea for this story and I want it to have some weight behind it. So here, I'm going to spend this thing and this is what's going to happen. Now, obviously, if you've got somebody who isn't very mature or somebody who's trying to mess around with the game, that can fail in spectacular fashion. But if we can run with the assumption that everybody is acting in good faith, they're great for that.
Yeah. Like, I remember when I was playing Necessary Evil, which is a Savage Worlds-based superhero game, you could tell that the Benny economy was kind of what the game was leaning on because there were some weird imbalances in that. Savage Worlds is a good system, but it's pretty carefully balanced. And when you just throw a bunch of numbers at it to make it a superhero game, the balance ends up being off.
Superheroes are such a hard game design problem.
They are. I love the setting that Necessary Evil came up with and the theme and the high concept. It's super cool. The system needed to maybe be more carefully considered.
Yeah.
It's a system knock. It is not a setting knock by any means. I loved that idea.
Maybe it would be better to do it with mutants and masterminds or something, though, huh?
Who knows? My point is, I could clearly tell a difference on days the GM was feeling stingy versus days the GM was feeling generous.
Interesting.
And so that is something that I think is occasionally a problem. If there's not a very prescribed method of giving out bennies, it can kind of just be a thing where it's like, well, today's a low benny day.
Yeah, I will say I am a big fan of systems that give you limited bennies that you only ever get once. Like Monster of the Week, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse. I don't know if other Powered by the Apocalypse games do this, but Monster of the Week, you get 7 bennies. And that's it, and you never regenerate them. You get 7 chances to try to turn your luck around.
Yeah, Fellowship doesn't have that. It has some other resources that you expend. I wouldn't call them bennies, but that's cool. I think it is designed for shorter games too, right? Like,
yes.
You would kind of run out after a very long campaign. You'd have to make some allowance for that. But a 3 to 4 episode mini arc, yeah, that could work really well.
Yeah.
So there we go. I think we've at least hit around the question if we haven't directly answered it.
Yeah.
As for games which involve like certain dice pools, I have no idea. I can't speak to that at all. If you have dice math questions, I recommend anydice.com. It's a really cool site that lets you make graphs of different dice rolls and probabilities. Super helpful.
Cool.
I'll link that in the show notes, actually, because I do use that occasionally to kind of wonder about dice results. It's neat.
All right, well, should we get into our scripture and then onto our main topic?
Yes, please. I'll take Isaiah if that's okay.
All right, I guess I'll take Matthew.
And I'll take John.
Awesome.
All righty.
So this is Isaiah chapter 53, verses 6 and 7. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth.
This is Matthew 26, verse 26 through 29. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat this. This is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it with you new in my Father's kingdom."
And the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 29 through 34. The next day, John saw Jesus coming toward him and said, "Look, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. This is the one I meant when I said, 'A man who comes after me has surpassed me, because he was before me.' I myself did not know him, but the reason I came baptizing with water was that he might be revealed to Israel." Then John gave this testimony. "I saw the Spirit come down from heaven as a dove and remain on him, and I myself did not know him. But the one who sent me to baptize with water told me, 'The man on whom you see the Spirit come down and remain is the one who will baptize with the Holy Spirit.' I have seen and I testify that this is God's chosen one."
So we're talking tonight about gaming in allegorical Christian settings, and to a larger degree, creating allegorical Christian settings. So when we say Christian allegorical setting, first off, how many times can we say it? And second, what kind of settings are we talking about?
A lot of the time we're talking about, and we will be bringing this up a lot this episode, we are talking about Narnia-type settings, where Aslan is clearly Christ. He clearly goes to sacrifice himself in a very Christ-like manner. We will also be talking a little bit about allusion. So George MacDonald, who heavily influenced C.S. Lewis in his writing, frequently wrote Christian allusions into his books, such as a princess nursing her father back to life by feeding him bread and wine and stuff like that. A lot of people think of Frodo from Lord of the Rings as an allegory for Christ, or Aragorn, as they both, well, Frodo basically has basically an ascension, a death and ascension. Aragorn goes to the city of the dead. Tolkien didn't like that, by the way. He was very much like, no, this is my story. It's not an allegory for anything. It doesn't allude to anything. This is my story. I wrote it. Don't try to compare it to any other thing. To which I say,
acknowledge your influences, dude.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, his primary influences are like the Finnish national epics. So,
Yeah. But the main difference between Narnia and the books that George MacDonald wrote and Middle-earth is that the Chronicles of Narnia follows the very distinct story beats of the story of Christ, whereas the Lord of the Rings and George MacDonald books contain allusions to Christianity without completely following those same story beats in order. So even though Frodo throwing the ring into the lava or crossing over to basically the elven afterlife, although those story beats do really resemble aspects of the story of Christ, they do not follow the story as strongly as the Chronicles of Narnia did, especially The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah.
So that's the main difference between those two things. We will be hitting on aspects of both.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, it's worth saying that Tolkien was trying to do his own thing, and C.S. Lewis is like, I'm going to write an allegory, and you can't stop me.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, he did it twice.
Yeah.
Sort of. Because his space trilogy is closer to home, but still extremely allegorical.
Yeah. I mean, C.S. Lewis was not subtle about what he believed and why he thought it was good. And
yeah.
That is actually a thing that I love about C.S. Lewis.
And Christian allegory has a very strong tradition, going all the way back to Pilgrim's Progress, going all the way back to ancient Christian Roman poets. It's a thing that's been going on for centuries, millennia.
Most of the history of the church, yeah.
Allegory is extremely useful. But we're going to be drawing on modern fantasy allegorical literature because it's what we know and it's what a lot of our listeners know. So just keep that in mind. I can't say a lot about Pilgrim's Progress. I've read little bits and pieces, but I'm not an expert. I have read Narnia cover to cover, one end of the box to the other end of the box. I don't know how many times. So, you know.
That's what we're drawing from more.
Yeah. So here's a question for both of you. Why would you want to play in a setting that it has these allegorical elements? Or why would you want to play in a story that is explicitly a Christian allegory?
It can be a really great way to introduce a youth group to gaming. It's a really solid Christian youth group activity because you can most definitely say that it was related to Christianity as a religion and as a story and as a way of life, etc., etc. The vast majority of Christian youth group activities have to relate to Christianity in some way or another, and gaming is a really great way to do that. I know that my mother does or did that fairly frequently when she was teaching Sunday school. It can also be really great for Christian evangelism, but I personally, A, I don't think I could do it, and B, I think you'd have to be really, really careful about how you did it so that it's not super heavy-handed, browbeating, Christianity is the only way to win this RPG. You don't want to get too heavily into that. You can also potentially use it for evangelizing gaming as a hobby, because there is still a segment of the Christian church that thinks that D&D is basically devil worship and related to Satanism. And so
yes, much to our chagrin, and that of the Max podcast, and that of Inroads Ministries, and that of Derek White, and on and on and on.
And on. Yeah. So if you can show somebody, this is a tool that can be used for God's will, to express your own religion in your life, that can potentially ease suspicious players into the game more easily, or even just ease their suspicions about, well, I think my child might be into that Dungeons and Dragons. And it's like, well, if they are, it can be used like this too.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've got a couple more entries on here, and these are kind of the ones that I personally want to focus on because this is kind of where I sit. It's an excellent way to explore one's own feelings on religion and faith. I've been doing some of that with Lambert in Grant's game because I'm playing a cleric and it's convenient to do so. Mm-hmm. And settings and stories like this are just nice for Christian fellowship. It's good to be kind of steeped in these familiar elements and stuff, and it's just comforting. I like my faith. I kind of enjoy being able to just kind of sit in the warmth that it provides sometimes, as shallow as that sounds.
Well, no,
absolutely.
Fellowship is a real thing, and it's something that I often don't give enough credit to. Fellowship with other Christians. Sometimes I only think of gaming sometimes in terms of like an outreach thing, or like, well, you know, I'm already a Christian. I want to go be with people who aren't. But sometimes it's like, no, I just need to recharge and refresh and enjoy myself in this company that I trust.
Yeah.
I don't give that enough credit sometimes. And I think this works really well.
Yeah. One of the best gaming groups I was ever part of, we all met in church. We even tried to get our pastor to game with us because he had gamed all through college, and we were trying to make a really solid Christian gaming group. And it's so nice to be in a gaming group where you all have a shared moral footing and a shared moral framework, so we know that we're not going to turn into slavers and try to enslave all the goblin people, because we don't do that because we're Christians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's just nice to know that we probably aren't going to run up against any real big, bad moral and ethical complications due to difference in
personal
religious ethics and personal ethics. It's so comforting to be able to just be. It's so nice.
The last thing I want to say about this is that allegory is powerful and the story of Christ is powerful, and combining those two things makes for a very powerful story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Don't hesitate to use a really good story for your game. Mm-hmm. If you make it explicitly allegorical, sometimes instead of trying to hide your sources, you can just lean into it and say, this is what we're doing, guys. Let's have fun with it.
Just absolutely own it.
Yeah, what's that wonderful C.S. Lewis quote? The value of myth is that it takes all the things that you know and restores to them the rich significance that's been hidden by the veil of familiarity.
Exactly.
How do you just pull that one out all the time?
Because we've quoted it roughly once every 3 episodes for the entire history of the podcast.
He's not wrong.
I have that better memorized than some of the scripture I know.
Also not wrong.
Yeah. I may have gotten a word or two wrong, but that's definitely the thrust of that quote.
Yeah. Only 1 or 2 little words. I checked.
Okay.
Yes, I also had it prepared and ready to go for exactly that reason.
It's so applicable. I mean, in some ways, it's hard to do this episode because this is what we've been talking about for 120 plus.
In many ways, yeah. How do we work Christian allegory or allusions into a game setting?
Do you want me to get specific about the one I've been blogging about, or do you want to talk in general terms? Because I can do either now.
Well, given our time constraints, let's keep it very general, although I would say that we should link to your series in the show notes.
Yes.
I want to start off by reminding everyone that allegory is story. When we're talking about allegory, we're talking about the story that happens. You can have a setting that is reminiscent of things, but that's not quite allegory. That's more allusion. So just keep that in mind. Mm-hmm. And allusion is probably a whole lot easier because it's just elements that you can draw from rather than like trying to have a parallel story.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can kind of reference things and then just kind of let it be rather than having to construct everything around it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Since we did run so long in the earlier part of this, I do want to get to one thing that I specifically promised one of our listeners that I would include in this because I asked for a little bit of feedback before we got started. Mm-hmm. So Jim Nanban specifically wanted to know how you would incorporate like a specifically Christian alignment system into a game. And I don't think I'd be willing to tackle this question if I hadn't already done it as part of that setting design series. So I guess maybe this is whet your appetite for that or something, but here's what I wound up doing. The setting that I've been working on is specifically a D&D 5e one. And as such, it uses the classic 3x3 alignment grid of, good, neutral, evil, and then law, neutral, chaos, right?
Yeah.
I've been wanting to incorporate some Christian themes into stuff, and I also, because the setting deals a lot with redemption and corruption and just kind of like larger moral themes, I wanted a more granular alignment system than D&D comes standard with, especially 5e, which basically just uses it as flavor and doesn't have any mechanical linkages at all. Mm-hmm. So I was sitting around trying to figure out how I was going to do this. And credit where credit is due to another listener, actually. Doug Hagler and I swatted some ideas around kind of early in the writing of the setting design in some of the comments on the blog post, and I came up with the idea kind of as a result of having talked with him of using the virtue vice pairs for the good versus evil portion of it, and then coming up with kind of another set of 6 of personality traits for the law chaos part of it. You've got, pride versus humility, envy versus kindness, wrath versus patience, diligence versus sloth, charity versus greed, gluttony versus temperance, and lust versus chastity. By assigning those pairs an individual numeric score based on how good a particular character is at kind of following the better part of their nature with regards to that, virtue versus sin. That gives you like an overall numerical score that you can use to say, okay, this person may be particularly good on, humility or something, but he's very wrathful, he's very gluttonous, he has a lot of problems with envy, so this guy still falls like, somewhere in the neutral category or even the evil one, despite having some individual virtues. And it allows you to kind of stick within the same 3x3 alignment grid framework, but still have more moral complexity. And then the personality side of things, I chose duty versus independence, efficiency versus artistry, meticulousness versus expediency, satisfaction versus excitement, tradition versus progress, and sacrifice versus pragmatism, and kind of scored those the same way. I actually did a worked example with Lambert, my cleric character from Grant's game, so you can kind of see what it looks like. And that was kind of how I worked some specific traditional Christian ideas into the alignment system for a game. There's a lot more detail on the actual blog post about it. It specifically was Setting Design Report Part 3, the second post on the Moral Universe. So if you really want to see the detail of how I did that, that's where you can find it. But, I think sometimes it's okay to put your game designer hat on with some of this stuff. I mean, we have all of these wonderful resources, tropes, stories, parables, all of this stuff. And I think you can, if you're respectful with it, you can use it to, it's got a lot of that mythic weight that we talk about, right? It's got a lot of cultural significance behind it in addition to, the obvious religious weight and stuff. And I think it gives us a really good language to describe certain things with.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I think using it in that way, as long as you try to be respectful with it, I think it can be very effective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. And you're right. I especially like your point about pulling in mechanics and putting that game design hat on. It's easy to think of this as something that only relates to story. Go ahead and make mechanical connections to this, right? You can... Yeah. I would almost say have a mechanical allegory. Or like a mechanical relationship between these things.
I kind of tried to with that alignment system, so...
Maybe bring it in with the healing system or resurrection systems, possibly, as we talked about in our previous episode.
You know what? Actually, I haven't written this blog post yet, but I'll give you guys a preview of something that's coming up. I actually did touch on the resurrection thing. I did kind of the primal history of the setting, kind of like, back around creation and that sort of thing. Uh-huh. I drew kind of fairly heavily on the Bible and then also on what we have called para-Christian mythology before. So like, Milton and stuff. There was a war in heaven, and one of the things that happened is the adversary decided to start making their own clerics to compete with the ones that God was providing power to. And it kind of worked, but a lot of the stuff that would be redemptive or restorative or that sort of thing is corrupted and twisted. So instead of having access to full resurrection spells like we talked about in our resurrection magic episode, that's where undead came from. I am going to have it so that the system of advantage versus disadvantage applies to healing and damaging spells from those clerics. All of the dice for a healing spell from an evil cleric will be at disadvantage, and they will also leave horrible, painful scars. Whereas one of the good clerics, what they are supposed to do is restore and heal and make things better. So, if one of them heals you, the injuries just kind of peel off of your body and you're whole when they're done.
Okay.
So that's maybe not quite as explicitly allegorical, I guess, but it feeds into kind of like the feel or theme that I want. And I'm toying with the idea of letting the bad guys have their damaging spells like inflict wounds and harm actually be at advantage to kind of compensate for the loss of healing power. I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to do that yet, but I have definitely entertained the idea.
Mm-hmm. So in there are still like a lot of elements that a Christian allegorical setting could have. You've got your angelic figures, you've got demonic figures. You mentioned that it is a monotheistic setting. There is one God.
Yeah.
I also know of a setting called Westbound, where the creators tried to include a distinctly Trinitarian situation representing...
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Props for the courage there.
Yeah. So that one's interesting. I'm really looking forward to playing that one, actually.
Yeah, sounds cool.
And I think the only thing, and you've mentioned that you're sort of hesitant to add this, would be like a messianic Christ-like figure.
Yeah.
That one's kind of critical to the whole Christian religion,
yeah,
but it wouldn't absolutely be necessary.
And see, that's the problem right now is my setting is very, I guess it's about 80% Judaism and 20% Christianity right now because you don't have that messianic figure yet.
Yeah.
And I would kind of like to get that in there, and I just haven't had a good idea for how yet.
Honestly, though, I feel like a lot of what could end up being a good Christ allegory or a Christ-like figure could be the party itself, because we do want to emulate Christ in our lives. We do want to lay down our lives for our friends. We are called to be like Christ. And so having a game that could follow those beats and have the party be like Christ in that sense could be a possibility. I would be really nervous about GMing it. I think I might be able to play it maybe, but it would have to be done very sensitively.
I would, if that was how it was going to go, I'd have some long discussions with the player group before we put pencil to character sheet.
Yeah, and a lot of this I would also recommend starting right from the beginning, asking how far the group wants to go into Allegory. I think this would be a session 0, possibly the beginning of session 1, and continual checkups throughout the game.
Yeah, I think I would, if I was going to go somewhere near that territory, I think I would almost rather have the player character group fill a role more like that of the Apostle Paul. Where they're still an early and very important figure, but they're not the actual incarnate children of God, you know?
Yeah. I also, while I was writing out bits and pieces of the outline, I was also trying to think of a way you could potentially also have them be like the apostles themselves, following Christ himself, but that could lead to a really weird GMPC situation and weirdness, and I don't think I'd be comfortable doing that personally. Yeah. Technically speaking, a messianic Christ-like figure is not absolutely necessary to have a Christian allegorical, allusive setting.
I think you could also have a setting where you know that there is a Christ figure coming.
Yeah.
And that might be a safer way to do it. You're in that pre-salvific period where you hope for and pray for a Messiah, and there are rumors of one coming. You know, there are hints and signs something's about to happen.
Yeah.
But you're not having to play a Christ figure.
Yeah.
Well, and I think also with the way that, A, the setting is being constructed, and B, the way that player characters of even the most noble dispositions tend to be, I almost think that those events are better to have going on in the background than the foreground with the PCs. Because I think a very important component of that saving is sacrifice and nonviolence and teaching and that sort of thing. And while I could see doing something that delves deeply into those themes with, like, drama system or something else that's very story-heavy, that is not a D&D campaign.
No, absolutely not.
Not even a little bit.
Yeah.
So I feel like trying to get all of that stuff in a D&D setting that has as its two touchstones heavy metal and Christianity is going to just be too many things piled on top of each other, and it's just going to drop like a Jenga tower with the bottom pulled out.
Yeah.
I like the idea of it happening in the background. I'd still have to give it a tremendous amount of thought, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of plays into how I would approach this, because there are certain elements and story beats that I would want to kind of have in the setting, like, for example, a creation story.
Yeah.
But you also don't have to play that out, and you don't have to start with that when you're creating the setting.
Yeah, and I do have the bones of one of those anyways already, so...
Well, sure,
that's
but...
one box checked, but yeah.
The thing is, like, one of the reasons that the Chronicles of Narnia has such a powerful creation story is that it doesn't start with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get invested in the setting and then go, oh, and by the way, this happened and this is how everything was set up and this is where everything began. And you could jump back to that, but you have that emotional investment before you pull a Tolkien and start laying out the Silmarillion. Having said that, the creation story in the Silmarillion is one of my favorite bits of Tolkien's writing, period.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's beautiful, but it's not as exciting if you don't know that it's setting up Middle-earth.
Yeah.
It's not a very good, or it's...
This stuff works better if you're already excited about what happens afterwards.
Yeah. It's one of those ones where, like, you want the spoilers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think, having that stuff in the background and pulling that in here and there, but, having a story first that creates this setting, I think is possibly a valuable approach. Have certain points you're going to hit, but don't limit the story to that.
Yeah. Some of those possible story beats, I know that the Anglican Church is very much driven by these specific story beats in that we go through these specific ones every year. Every church calendar. The baptism by John is one. You can definitely allude to that because it is a very strange story, and baptism itself is a theme in so many stories. Like you can't even count them all.
Yeah.
The Transfiguration, possibly, where Christ shows up with, I believe it was Abraham and Moses on the top of a mountain and is completely transfigured before the disciples. And then you've got your standard Good Friday and Easter fair, the crucifixion, the resurrection. Later on, you've got the Ascension and Pentecost, which both have themes that could be very interesting for a story, especially Pentecost, because that would be like, all of a sudden your party has this strange shared experience this strange shared spiritual experience. Regardless of background. That could be really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could work well. I don't have a whole lot else to add to this.
I could probably keep going for a little while with certain things, but I think we can probably leave it here unless you've got anything else that you really want to get in there, Jenny.
Not especially.
Okay. For more of Peter's thoughts on this, I do recommend you check out his setting design series on our blog.
Absolutely.
Again, I'll link that in the show notes. He gets into a lot of this, and he's been very responsive to comments on those blog posts as well. So
It's almost like I get some of my best ideas talking to our listeners when they comment on the posts.
Yeah, well, there's that. And, not to put more work on you responding to things, but it's really cool. So I want to see where it goes. I want to see what other questions people have about it, because it's neat.
No, in all seriousness, though, guys, I love getting those questions. It makes me, re-examine what I'm working on. It gives me ideas that I didn't have before. I mean, the whole, virtues and vices based alignment system was down to a conversation I had with Doug Hagler, who you've heard Patreon questions from before. So, yeah, definitely, if you've got feedback for me about that stuff, please, I want to hear it.
I think this is as good a place as any to wrap things up. If you liked this episode, consider supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com/savingthegame. And of course, please consider sharing this episode out with friends and family and social media contacts. If you like it, that helps us a great deal. And we definitely want to hear your thoughts on this. If you've made allegorical settings in particular or pulled in elements of allegory, we really want to hear about those. And I'm sure other listeners do too. So don't just send them to us. Tweet them at us, put it in our Discord, start up a conversation about them, comment on the episode blog post below this. We love hearing that stuff, and our other listeners like to hear about it and talk about them, so share it around. We appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely.
From all of us here at Saving the Game, have a good one. Take it easy. We'll catch you next time.
See you later, folks.
This has been a production of Saving the Game. All episodes are produced and published under a Creative Commons 4.0 Attribution Share-alike license. Our logo is by Ruben Smith Zempel of 3d6design.com. Our music is The Promised Place Beyond the Clouds by James Opie. You can find more of his music at nihilore.com. To hear our past episodes, to find syndication and license details, to connect with our fantastic listener community, or to contact us or support our show through Patreon, visit our website at stgcast.org or savingthegamepodcast.org. God bless, do good, and happy gaming.